Priorities USA did some focus groups. They did a survey of 800 individuals who previously supported Barack Obama, who now supported, or in the election supported, Donald Trump. You know, the data that we gleaned from it was actually fascinating. And it tells a story that I actually wanted to bring some backup in to discuss. Jonathan Cohn.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. My
pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me. I've been following your work for a while. You're a researcher, you're an editor, you're an activist. I follow your work here in Boston. You're always on the ground. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of images. Pull up the first image. This is the data. Let's see if we can get the data on the screen. All right. So this is a survey that was conducted by Priorities USA. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty establishment.
Yeah, it's one of the major super PACs for the Democratic Party.
Absolutely, big supporters of Barack Obama, or actually, it grew out of the Obama campaign, and they supported Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because as we get ready to dig into this, the very first thing that we dismiss now because of who's conducting it, we should be able to dismiss it because of proper methodology, but you know, the political spin part of it. This is not anyone who has it out for Hillary Clinton. This is someone who was in for Hillary Clinton, and they've done this research.
Yeah, and I know that one of the current heads at Priorities USA used to work for the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee. Okay. So it's somebody who's very much so in that sphere of establishment
Democratic
politics.
For anyone who's watching this now and is going to say, oh, this is some type of Bernie bro stuff, it's completely frivolous, fatuous. This is scientific research conducted by people who were in for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the reason I brought you on is because I was reading your comments on it on Twitter. Yeah. What's your first major takeaway from the data that you saw?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting things that I thought, so it's not on the screen here, but it was when they were looking at similarities between the drop-off voters and the Obama-Trump voters. Mm-hmm. Since there are two dynamics that you saw back in November. There was a kind of a small percentage of people, it would be in the single digits, but elections are won on the margins. Right. That people who had voted either Obama-Trump, or then maybe just Obama-Trump. Okay. So there are people who flipped, but there are also people who just decided not to vote at all. Right. That maybe they came out both elections, maybe they just came out one, and then they decided I'm staying home. Mm-hmm. And one thing that was particularly fascinating is one similarity between them was reported economic anxiety. Right. Where the Obama-Trump voters, there's something like 50% of them reported that they were kind of having difficulty with that the cost of living was outpacing their earnings, and then another 31% said they were just getting by. Mm-hmm. For those who are drop-off voters, those numbers were, I believe, 43 and 49. Okay. So in both cases, it's going to be people who tended to be more working class and are economically struggling. Okay. And yet you have one group decides to flip, the other decides not to vote at all. All right. Often connected to what they think of how much they disagree with and dislike Donald Trump.
So I'm going to do something completely unprofessional here, but I want to make sure that the people could see you good. Do you mind coming into the shot just a little more? Just a little bit more that way. Perfect. Now everyone can see your beautiful face.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So this is a survey of people who either didn't vote. Yeah. Or they voted for Donald Trump and they previously voted for Barack Obama. Yeah. And in most of the findings, it was legitimately about economic anxiety.
Yeah, or at least reported. So it's difficult to know exactly their own economic circumstance. Right. But when talking with the voters, that's what they reported about their own living standards. Okay, so and this is in Michigan and Wisconsin, just for additional.
So let's break this apart real quick. Let's break this apart because one of the number one things we fought in this election was class versus race. It's an ongoing argument. And anyone who voted for Donald Trump was considered a racist or racist adjacent, I think John calls it. Racist adjacent. Like they were okay enough with racism to vote for Donald Trump. So and again, to underscore what you've already said, this is not proof that they were not racist. Yeah. This just shows that they stated that they have economic anxiety.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing to understand is that when anybody makes a decision for how to vote, there are many factors going on at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that you can see almost in the contrast of there are two groups of people, both who are economically struggling, who are at least reported economically struggling, and had a degree of dissatisfaction with kind of the status quo, obviously with the Democratic Party. Some decided I'm going to sit home. Some decided I'm going to vote for Donald Trump.
Okay.
And for those who decided to vote for Donald Trump, there is somewhat of there was likely some of what I would call like a passive racism, at least. That it's not like every person who voted Donald Trump is a closet member of the Klan.
Yeah, yeah.
But there are people who are willing to accept some of what he was saying. That they were willing to tolerate it, to go along with it, and to vote for him rather than taking, let's say, the apathetic route of pox on both their houses. I'm sitting this one out.
Okay. All right, so let's break down some of the numbers, and then we'll come back to, because the political commentary, or the commentary in general around it, I think is very important, because it's how we're going to use this data to shape conversations going forward that actually determines whether or not the Democratic Party can become the party of the people. And I think this is some of what we see in this first graph. The first question that we have up here, and again, this was reported by the Washington Post.
Yeah,
Washington Post.
Yeah, Greg Sargent in the Washington Post.
All right, special thanks to Greg for getting this information out, Sargent, and Priorities USA for doing this research. Persuadable voters believe Donald Trump will help the middle class over the wealthy, but don't feel the same about congressional Republicans. This was fascinating to me. So they did not believe the Republican Party was going to take care of them. But at least, 50% thought, or 50% thought the Republicans, actually, let me gather this together, right? So 50% thought that the Republican economic policies would favor the rich.
Yeah, of those with mixed feelings about Donald Trump.
Of those with mixed feelings about Donald Trump versus mixed feelings about Donald Trump, do you think congressional Democrats' economic policies will favor 38% of those who had mixed feelings about Donald Trump felt the same way about the Democrats? But for Donald Trump, 26% for those would have mixed feelings. Yeah. It seems as though they don't believe in the Democrats, they don't believe in the Republicans, but those who left Obama and came to Trump believe that Trump would take care of the middle class.
Yeah, and what was particularly fascinating when seeing this data to me is how it made me remember back in the election about the conscious effort from the Clinton campaign to distance Trump from congressional Republicans.
Right.
I know in some of the leaked emails or the hacked emails that we had seen that was a direct strategy from the Clinton campaign communicated to the DNC that they wanted to make sure that they're saying that Trump, that he's an anomaly in the Republican Party, he's worse, he's kind of messing with that existed there, and then kind of contrasting him with perhaps the good Republicans. Yeah. And this shows somewhat of a fallout of that. Right. Because if you're constantly trying to distance Trump from congressional Republicans, and people don't like congressional Republicans,
then you're sabotaging yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you're saying this guy's different, and if he's different, maybe it's different, it can be different in a good way, it could be different in a bad way, but if people want change, it makes them more receptive to what he's saying, that at least he's making the right enemies in their mind. Yeah. That if these people don't think that he's troublesome, maybe he's troublesome for the right reasons. He's not, but it opens up that possibility.
Right, right. So and not to restate what you've already stated, but I think it may have gotten lost. The Democratic Party made a conscious decision not to tie Donald Trump to the Republican Party in hopes of gleaning some of the moderate Republicans for Hillary Clinton. And in doing that, they left a wide opening that actually helped Donald Trump, because they were like, well, Donald Trump isn't the Republican Party. Donald Trump is something in and of himself.
Exactly, and you even saw that throughout the campaign when Clinton would celebrate endorsements that she was getting from prominent, often Republican-leaning or Republican-donating figures, or even people who ran as Republicans in the past, like Meg Whitman, who had run as a Republican candidate for governor in California, and she was having Meg Whitman go on the stump for her. And I know that there was a former Reagan official who spoke at the convention.
Exactly.
There was a woman that I believe she's worked for the Chamber of Commerce. Her job was actually to lobby against the Affordable Care Act. Yeah. And she had a speaking engagement in the convention.
She was there. She was part of it.
And there was also Clinton's desire to have Republican national security experts, many of them who are staunch neocons, to kind of speak her praises and kind of get them to defect from.
And so this is the gaping hole that allow a narrative to be built that Donald Trump isn't the Republican Party. But now, on this side of it, clearly anyone who's seeing this data now, or anyone that responded this way, clearly should be able to see that a lot of what Donald Trump is doing is in lockstep with the Republican Party. So we missed, and when I say we, those of us who didn't want Donald Trump to be president, we missed the golden opportunity to tie him to the policies that we knew were coming.
Exactly. And with Donald Trump, he's such a perfect kind of example of, so to say, the various ills of capitalism in one person, that would have been a really easy thing to run against.
Yeah.
Perfectly. It's kind of, when you think about in 2012, where there was an effort from the Obama campaign to paint Mitt Romney as this billionaire who's out for his billionaire friends and doesn't care about you. Right. Whereas the Clinton campaign often avoided discussing policy in ads. I know that there had been one study that looked at this, and it showed that only 25% of the ads in her favor talked policy, and then 90% of the ads, kind of from Clinton-allied groups against Donald Trump, were focused mainly on Trump as an individual rather than policy issues.
Right, and I'm reminded of the survey of campaign ads that showed that Hillary Clinton's campaign ads were not substantive on policy whatsoever. Yeah,
and which was a kind of, and even there was a striking contrast from past years of campaigns, where hers is like below what the prior low had been, since parties typically engage in a certain amount of policy content now.
Here's what I want to push back, not so much against you, but you're kind of standing in proxy for Greg here and for priorities. Donald Trump had a masterful way of never being held to a single policy anyway. And if something was said in a debate, for instance, that was negative from the Republican Party, Donald Trump would right there on the spot say something that's positive and that's populist, and that he probably would have convinced people anyway whether or not Hillary Clinton's campaign went to tie him to the Republican Party. What do you think about that?
So it is possible. It is impressive that Donald Trump can have, let's say, 5 different opinions on a single issue within a matter of a few minutes.
But a few minutes,
However, I think that speaks to kind of a different dynamic of the need to have an affirmative agenda on the other side. That Donald Trump might be able to talk every which way about a given issue. Some of those ways good, some of those ways objectively terrible. So a few of those ways good, most of those ways objectively terrible. But that means that you have to have a positive and affirmative thing on the other side.
Which we didn't have this time.
Exactly. And that one thing I'll say that Clinton did have many white papers on her website. And so some people will complain that it's not right to say that her campaign didn't have policies. And they did. They did have, and there were often, some of them were very detailed, some less. The problem was that nobody's going to be going to your campaign website to find that out.
Exactly.
That I know I'm a rowdy. I like looking at campaigns, like candidates' campaign websites and what they say on various things. I know I'm not the average voter.
Right. Even it can't exist online, right?
Exactly.
You can tell people to go to your website all you want. People are not going to consume white pages, right? So that can't be the excuse, right? You have to have, at most, they're going to take a 1-page PDF with bullet points, max.
Exactly, because a lot of people just simply don't have the time. And I remember when looking at the issues page on her website, it kind of looked like a Pinterest page, and it was alphabetically ordered of like issue by issue. And it's even difficult if I were someone and I heard somebody tell me about all of the great issues that or the issue papers that Clinton had on this positions, I would be confused when I went there because I wouldn't even know where to begin. Okay. And it speaks to the need for kind of an overarching narrative to combine all of that together.
All right. Let's toggle to the next image and take a look at John. Switch to the next image you wanted us to go over, so we could discuss the meaning of that next data.
While that's going on, I just want to make one more quick point.
Sure, go for it.
In the running for that. One thing I thought was particularly interesting that this relates to, so that there was research, I can't remember if the paper formally came out yet or not, but it was by a scholar at UMass Amherst, the name was Jesse Rhodes. It was looking at over from like 1952 to, I can't believe if it ended in 2008 or 2012, and looking at voters, what they liked the most about the Democratic Party and the least, what they liked the most about Republicans, and what they said they liked the least. And typically it was a class for what people said was the best thing about the Democratic Party. It was that it was, quote, the party of the working class. Right. And what they liked the least about Republicans, it was that the party of big business and the upper class.
Right.
And it was interesting to see an election in which that dynamic really didn't play in. To a lot of the rhetoric on both sides.
Interesting. All right, let's shift gears to the next image. Trump supporters prioritize Social Security, Medicare, and jobs, but only strong supporters prioritize immigration and trade. So this goes to the core and this is, again, these are the people that switched from Obama to Trump, and they switch prioritizing Social Security, Medicare, and jobs. So this cuts right to the core of the question of whether or not these voters were just racist, which I have plenty of commentary on in a minute. But I mean, we can't just toss this out.
Yeah, and I think that this speaks to one other dynamic that I noted before, that insofar as that there are some similarities between drop-off voters and people who flipped, that they're very different. They're different in how they view Donald Trump. But if insofar as there are shared economic anxieties, if you focus on getting the people who dropped off to turn out, you can have positive spillover to those who flipped, because you'd be addressing those kind of issues that they share.
Right, those substantive issues. And did we discuss Social Security or Medicare and jobs in a substantive fashion in this campaign? And the answer is, I mean, not really.
Yeah, so like there are things that they might come up, but for an average voter who isn't reading as much media content as I am on an everyday basis, I couldn't fault them for not thinking of it.
Wow. And then those, and I don't want to minimize this, but those who prioritize immigration, it was a percentage. Let's see where it is on here. Immigration.
Deporting
immigrants who are in the country illegally. You had 30% of Republicans who formerly voted for, they swapped over to Obama. 30% said it's not important, right? Those who had mixed feelings. I mean, what is your take on that?
I would say that, and I think it's interesting when you see that there is a contrast between, you have some people who, and probably a lot of those in the mixed feelings would be the group of people who saw their vote as a vote against Clinton more than a vote for Trump.
Yeah.
So that if those who saw their vote as definitely a vote for Trump, you'll likely see a lot more longer like overt racism and stronger xenophobia. Whereas you'll see people, and those who had mixed feelings about him, they might not like some of that. They might be willing to tolerate it, but their animosity is toward what they see as not having benefited from the years of Democratic rule.
So those 50% of those who strongly supported Donald Trump. So now this goes to that argument that they couldn't possibly be racist because they voted for Obama. But now we're saying 50% of those who left Obama and went to Trump, 50% of those who have strong feelings, strongly support Donald Trump, they felt that deporting immigrants who were in the country illegally was an important issue. Yeah,
and that's, I think, one thing that's, when discussing the role of, let's say, racism in the election last year, I think one thing that's always important to realize is that racism isn't a binary. It follows much more of a spectrum, because it's not as though, say, every person who's a racist in the United States is basically a Klan member.
Yeah.
And then you're either a Klan member or then you're one of the good ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's far more complex, and that's also just thinking in terms of one thing that Obama might have gotten many people to vote for him despite their racism.
Yeah.
That they may have, because people are a bundle of different issue positions and preferences and feelings, and some rational and some not. And for any election, it's what you can get them to cast their vote on.
Okay.
So you might have had people who, even in the last election, that they were hostile to immigrants, but they cast their vote on something else.
Right. So it's more of a statement that for Obama's populist message, they were willing to overcome their racism. But now that they saw that Obama didn't really help them on their it didn't actually govern as a populist, they just went right on back to where they were.
Yeah, and then one thing I will say, that one thing that definitely didn't help Democrats is the fact that a lot of people don't understand the way the federal government works. So Obama could have done a lot more. He was somewhat limited by congressional Republicans, but what people will see will be the person up at the front, and that'll be the presidency. And I think that probably also ends up making it so that people will say, well, because I didn't benefit from 8 years of him, let's try the other side.
All right.
In part, it's a mixed bag. A lot of it is that Republicans don't want to help people, but there is a lot that Obama could have done in executive power, or when you had full Democratic control, that would have improved the situation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I think we have a comment from either Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Let's take a look at it. On YouTube, John Stephen Frank says, Clinton couldn't run ads on policy that appealed to the populace without pissing off the DNC donors. I mean...
Which is true, and that reminds me of one thing I was thinking of earlier, is the fact that at the DNC's convention earlier this year, where they chose the new chair, they voted down a ban on donations from corporate lobbyists.
Right.
And that kind of just shows that in conflict, that kind of in the Democratic Party, that gives rise to things like people seeing the congressional Democrats as working primarily for the rich, is that kind of like you can't serve two masters, so to speak. That
I felt the sermon in there.
That if you're going to be, you can't both be is one way I can put it before. You can't both be the party of the lobbyists who are fighting the Affordable Care Act and the people benefiting from it.
Yeah.
You can't be both the kind of the candidate for the person lobbying against the Employee Free Choice Act.
Yeah.
And the candidate of the unions.
Yeah. Let's pull up the next comment. John, I mean, my producer back there is killing it. Old Maryland on YouTube said, this is what's wrong with the Democratic Party, too. They stand for what? What issues? And I think what we're gleaming from this conversation is that, like you said, they want to have it both ways. They want to have corporate donors, corporate lobbyists, money coming in. They want to be okay. They want to be in bed with Wall Street. They want it to be okay for them to get $400,000 speeches from Wall Street and just have a revolving door. And they never want to let go of the working class. And if they do let go of the working class, it's the racist working class that they're letting go of. Right. So, you know, what's your take on it?
Yeah, because I think it's one thing that I've heard over time from people of various, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or people who are neither, that you know what Republicans stand for. It's often something, it may be something bad, but you do know what Republicans stand for. And with the Democrats, it's much less clear. And sometimes it's because Democrats run away from their positions, and sometimes it's because Democrats like kind of very kludgy policies that are difficult for people to even understand, so that they don't even know if they're benefiting from the policy. Sometimes it's because Democrats like along the lines of like the kludgocracy, they like benefiting what they're doing. They're like putting it into the tax code where people don't actually see that they're benefiting.
Right, exactly.
So it's difficult to see like, this is the tangible thing that I'm getting because of democratic governance, and I like this, and I want to see more of that.
And I think the biggest takeaway that I got from this survey was that the working class, even some of the racist working class, but the working class in general, they're searching. They're going back and forth between parties, and they're willing to switch and swap as needed for somebody who's going to actually do something for the middle class / working class, and they're not finding it. So, I mean, what do you think about that?
And I think that speaks to a lot of looking into the election. There are some elections happening this year, 2018, or even looking out to 2020. The Democrats really do need to have a very clear message, and a message that's also reflected in how the party operates.
Yeah.
So that you need to have a very clear and robust message about how you're going to help people, how you're going to take on the large pharmaceutical companies, how you're going to talk on the banks, how you're going to talk on the health insurance companies, industries that actually are having a negative impact on people's everyday life and their ability to afford and have a decent standard of living. But you also need to reflect that needs to be reflected in how you operate as a party, because the strength and believability and credibility of that message will be limited if you're taking money from the same people.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan Cohn, activist, researcher, editor, thanks so much for joining me, man. I think this was a very valuable conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I think we're actually, you know, they did the research, but in terms of an autopsy, like, it's not really happening. So
yeah, that's one thing that I've been disappointed with, is that no clear idea from the DNC when there will be an autopsy report.
Yeah.
And there had been an article in Politico the other day that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is treating their autopsy report kind of like the torture report, keeping it like so that you can only view it under close supervision.
Yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting to be able to have this data available.
And to have this conversation, man. Thanks so much for joining me. Love to have you back anytime you're available.
I'd love to be back.